Hi, this is a presentation on the definition essay which you will be working on this week. First of all, to give a brief definition of what the definition essay actually is that it takes an abstract term, some kind of an idea or a concept, and it makes it concrete. So when you're looking at a topic for this essay, you don't want to pick something that's concrete, like table or car or refrigerator. Those are things that aren't going to be easily defined in this essay. What you do want to find is an idea or a concept. So those would be things like love, friend, friendship, democracy, terrorism, some of those kind of ideas which are much larger. Those are concepts, not something that's concrete. So your goal is to make something that's not concrete a little bit more concrete. It will go into greater detail by describing and explaining your key characteristics. So the characteristics about a subject will help you then to define it, and it will provide enough information so the audience can gain a thorough understanding of the term. So this idea of making it concrete. Love is kind of a concept that's kind of out there. We can't actually touch it, put our finger on it. We know maybe what it looks like, but it's not something that we can physically touch. And so how do you make it concrete? The biggest thing is to go beyond the literal dictionary definition. Love has a definition in the dictionary, but go beyond that. Give us some examples of what love looks like. What about when you use I love ice cream? Is that different from loving someone? So look at the different uses of the word love. Maybe delve into its connotations. You might be able to provide some examples. You might provide some different synonyms. And then you might describe the term. So those are some ways that you can make it concrete. Give us something that we can kind of example, provide examples, something that we can take with us. One of the more difficult things with this essay is getting it to that 4-page limit. And so some people really want to know, how do I do that? How do I take a term and explain it in 4 full pages? And so here's just some of those examples. So you might give us the origin of the term or the etymology. So where does this word come from? Is it Latin? Is it Greek? Does that give any insight into the definition? And it might. You might talk about conditions of the term. Conditions of the term being, well, in order to have love or to have friendship, you need to have X, Y, and Z. So what are some conditions of the term? You might describe how the term might look. So maybe going way back into Comp 1 and doing, remember when we did the descriptive essay, using figurative language to help us to describe something. You might give a description of what that term might look like. You can explain the uses of the term or its functions. So if there is a term that has functions or uses, you might choose to go into depth about those. So think about, are there uses of this term? You might divide the term into parts, qualities or characteristics. And that would be something like if you were trying to define a friend, you might divide it into the characteristics of a good friend. You might provide us with examples, illustrations, or anecdotes being stories. And so if you have stories about a term that would help us to define it, that might be a good idea. If you're talking about friendship, for example, I had a student write an essay once who wrote about a very good friend and how that friend kind of picked him up when he was down and gave a very specific story of how that friend did that. So that was an illustration or an anecdote about a good friend. You could talk about causes and effects of the term if that is applicable for you. You could also compare and contrast the term. So give us some, kind of gets into the next one, some non-examples. So what is the term not? It's kind of a weird way of putting it perhaps, but you're thinking about, if I'm thinking about the word friend, what's a non-example of a friend? So if, a friend doesn't lie to you, or a friend, doesn't treat you poorly, those kind of things. That's what negation would be. All of these things I would definitely take a look at. So think about your term and kind of piece it out. Do any of these fit when you're looking at your definition. Some other things to think about: you want to focus on a detailed explanation of one term and then grow it to a point, a why or a so what. And this is going to be where your thesis statement comes from. So when you define a friend, and the example essay that you read is about friendship and a good student. Actually, it's about a good student. And that good student, when they go through that, they talk about the characteristics of a good student. And so they include those characteristics in the thesis, and then they expand upon those in the body paragraphs, and that's what you're being asked to do. So come up with a general definition in your thesis, and then illustrate that definition throughout. You might also, in your intro, think about talking about why you are defining the term that you've chosen. Certain words depend on context, and words have changed meaning thanks to technology or thanks to changing of times. And so you may have to provide us with some of that context or the history of that word. You might also explain the significance of the term that you've chosen to define. So there's some words that have more significance now than they maybe did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And also, as always, keep in mind your audience. What do they already know? What's their background with your term? If it's a term that everybody knows already and has one specific kind of definition that they all kind of believe in, you may have to do some education if you intend to go off of that definition. And you don't have to practice this, but this is just something for you to think about. We talked about context. The textbook talks about context a lot as well. And if you think about this, these 4 words, depending on the context, could be really positive or really negative. So if you think about a workaholic, if you were to define what a workaholic is, you could do that very positively. You could also do that very negatively. Someone who's considered a go-getter has positive connotations, also maybe has some negative connotations. A party animal, positive and negative. Overachiever, positive and negative. So you want to make sure that your definition fits just one, either all positive or all negative. And lastly, here's a list of essay topics that you may consider for your essay. These are just some of the options or the things that are out there. Any word really fits. So there's things like friendship, marriage, work, education, some scientific phenomenon. You see democracy, Catholicism. You could choose some other type of government. You could choose some other religion. Those are just some options for you to think about. Now some things for your final paper. Again, it needs to be something abstract, has to include some kind of an introduction with the thesis statement. The abstract term should have been made concrete for the audience throughout the body of the essay. Should be a so what included in there somewhere. First or third person point of view, it doesn't matter which one you use, past or present tense, also you can choose those things. The conclusion should bring the essay to a satisfying ending. You should try to include some sentence variety. And then as always, it should be clear, concise, and grammatically correct. I would also challenge you in this essay to really think about your transitions, to make the sentences and paragraphs flow one into the other, making for a really solid body paragraph or paragraphs. That's the end of this presentation. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask via email or via a phone call.